Welcome to Live from the Living Room, a new production included with our regular weekly The Live It Today podcast with Greg and Stephanie Schlueter. This is where real life meets real conversation. These are our belief and beverage evenings, moments of encounter where faith becomes lived, relationships deepen, and truth is not just discussed, but discovered together.
In this first episode, we're joined by Father Adam Hertzfeld, who leads us into a profound and deeply needed conversation of Josef Pieper's classic, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. If you sense that relationships, not productivity, are the true currency of life, then you're in the right place.
Find our daily Live It Today reflections and podcast at Live It, standing for Image the Trinity, liveittoday.us. And if this resonates, partner with us, because this isn't content, this is a way of life, and we're just getting started. Now, on with our program.
I'm glad Greg talked about repetition. It is a language of love. It's also the mother of all learning. And as a preacher, you realize after a while, I have nothing new to say. And then you realize not only do I have nothing new to say, I shouldn't be seeking anything new to say. Teaching the oldest of things to the youngest of people is the best of things that we can do. For example, so in preaching, we say the same things over and over, and hopefully we're more than less artful in how we put it all together so that keeps people interested. But even if people aren't kept interested, who cares? That's their problem. It's not the preacher's problem so much. If he's tried to put it together in a prayerful way, the message that he wants to give, what matters is that the message is true. If it's true, it strikes to the heart and it transforms the person. I had a friend once, when we were in seminary, we were talking about how we pray the Psalms as a part of the Liturgy of the Hours, and how it's the same Psalms over and over and over. And he says, yeah, you know what? It's like, it's the 150th time that I prayed that particular song, and it's the first time that a single line in it struck me. I thought, yeah, that's how we learn. So all that is to say, what I say tonight about Josef Pieper's thought, and maybe a little of my own thought mixed in with it, you might hear nothing new at all. But to be reminded of what is true is the purpose of it, because that's what will transform us. And of course, a little bit of bourbon helps the whole process go. But so this fellow, Josef Pieper, who was he? So he was a 20th century Catholic philosopher, and that says something right there, because we're not done with the 21st century by any means, but the 20th century was one of the worst in terms of the most dehumanizing of centuries that humanity has faced, I think. The various totalitarian mindsets and regimes that came into place killed more people than all the centuries previous in terms of persecutions. And those dehumanizing forces, they were born in the centuries prior. They thrived, or however you'd say that, in the 20th century, and they continue to affect us today. So we're like fish swimming in a pond of these secularizing, dehumanizing forces. So to be a Catholic philosopher in the midst of all that was to be very much against the culture, to have a lot of, you could say, weight put over and against you that might crush you. But Josef Pieper was not one to let that weight of secularism, atheism, a false humanism crush him. He, with his strong and solid faith, pushed back and did so successfully. So he was German and pretty much lived his life in Germany. He died in 1997, and I remember his death. I had already studied some of his works, and I was in my senior year in college in a philosophy of law class with a professor who was friends with Josef Pieper. And he said, he asked us all if we would pray for him, because he was at the end of his life. And so we prayed. We were praying for him. And then one day the professor told us that he had died. And so that professor, as a good friend, gave the class a week off, and he flew to Germany for his funeral. That was a good lesson for me, a lesson in how there is a camaraderie at the levels of high academics that can be a tremendous force for the good. Two philosophers, two different countries, two different continents, yet their friendship was strong enough that they were praying for one another, and that when one died, he would go and celebrate his funeral. Now, where does Josef Pieper's work come from as a Catholic philosopher? I think he definitely drew a lot from St. Thomas Aquinas, but he also drew a lot from the ancient Greeks. So blend that together, and that's where Josef Pieper was formed, in the mind of Thomas Aquinas and in the mind of the ancient Greeks. I'm less concerned with that and more concerned with the fact that he was a man whose mind was formed in the truth. I don't really care where the truth comes from, but when we see the truth, then we should cling to it with all our minds and hearts and soul and live our life by it, and that's what Josef Pieper did. As far as I know, I should have looked this up. I don't know if there is a cultus surrounding this man's life or not, meaning is there a group of people out there who pray to him as someone already in heaven, who lived a heroically holy life, and who, through his intercession, could help the rest of us here? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I'm not exactly sure. Like I say, I should look that up. What did he offer? So, like, in the face of these tremendously evil forces in the 20th century, these forces were dehumanizing us, he presented an authentic humanism, a Christian humanism that emphasized, in particular, virtue and contemplation, and also the integration of faith and reason. If I were to say, who are other thinkers that are like this man, Josef Pieper, I would say Joseph Ratzinger definitely is a thinker like Josef Pieper. I would say my favorite, Dietrich von Hildebrand, definitely. You see a lot of correspondence between their thought. Although, as far as I know, those two, even though they were both German Catholic philosophers, their paths, I don't believe, ever crossed. Now, there's a lot of different aspects to the dehumanizing, secular, atheistic humanism of the 20th century. What Pieper primarily battled was the utilitarian aspect of all of that. And so, what is utilitarianism? In my own words, I would say utilitarianism has the battle cry of the greatest good for the greatest number. So, hey, whatever we can give is the greatest good to the greatest number of people, that's what we should do. And it sounds pretty attractive as a moral philosophy until you start thinking about it a little more closely and say, but what does that mean exactly when it comes to the individual? So utilitarianism fundamentally is a type of collectivism. It groups everyone into this category of the greatest number. And so then anything goes so long as it serves this greatest number. And so the evil of this utilitarian mindset is that it tramples upon the rights of the individual. I remember in college, a philosophy professor in my ethics class, he was making the point about universal moral norms. And he said, one universal moral norm is that you could never deliberately torture or kill an innocent human being for any reason whatsoever. He said, let's say a madman had the whole world hostage with some type of bomb. He says, I'm going to blow up the whole world unless you turn over a small child for me to torture and kill. The professor asked us, can you do that? And we concluded, just like the professor wanted us to, absolutely not. You cannot break that norm, and if the whole human race has to suffer destruction because we choose not to hand over an innocent child to be tortured and killed for this madman's sake, then we're not going to do that. So Pieper would be right there with that in countering utilitarianism. Utilitarian would say, yeah, well, the greatest good for the greatest number, all of humanity is a pretty big number. And so we can bring about the continued good of their existence by handing over this one child for torture and death. Do it. Utilitarianism would conclude. Pieper raged against that and said, no, that's not the way that it works. So it's a great problem, like so many other theories of how we ought to run the world or run our lives, is that it destroys the individual person. It crushes the person and his or her rights. And so people are seen as expendable to the larger project. Now, so Pieper wrote a number of books. I've just read 3. Maybe the first book I read was Leisure, the Basis of Culture, the one I'm talking about tonight, which I haven't read in 25 years. So if I'm incorrect in some of my remembrances of the book, please forgive me. Then there's another book, The Philosophical Act. There's another book that is called The Four Cardinal Virtues, and some of you may remember we talked about that in a Lenten series at Perrysburg Auto Mall, 10 years ago, I think. We went through the Four Cardinal Virtues in the basement of one of the dealerships, I think the GMC dealership or something. Tonight we're talking about the other one, or the first one that I read, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. I'll just dive right in. So whenever we have a book that's like a scholarly book, I love to tell our school kids this in the parish, is that if you want to know what the book is about, explain the title. Figure out what the title says and what it's talking about, and then you can go from there. So this title, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, I see fundamentally 2 words that we have to know something about. On the one hand, what is it that is important? It seems to me culture is the most important thing, because we're looking for what is its foundation, the basis of culture. So this great thing, which is culture, has a foundation. And what is that foundation? That foundation is, according to Pieper, in the title at least, leisure. We'll dive in. I want to look at culture first, say what is culture, and then what is leisure, and then what are some implications of these 2 things as they go together. We won't take the time to go around the room and ask everybody's opinion of what culture is. Probably get a lot of different opinions as to what culture is. What Pieper wants to say culture is, and what I agree with Pieper and want to say what culture is, you could say this is on its most philosophic level, its most refined level. There's a lot of ways in which we can use the word culture that we'd say it's one of those words with multiple meanings. But we're looking for the most genuine, sincere, and deep meaning. And so that's what Pieper gets at in defining it. And I chose to do it by starting out with what is culture not. And so culture is not production. And so we remember, he's raging against 20th century philosophy. So one of the primary things in the 20th century was like a fascination with how much we can produce. And so Pieper would say culture is not production. It's not the sum of a society's economic output. So that is not culture in Pieper's eyes. He would say culture is not achievement. So in other words, the material development of a society is not culture. So what does that mean? Like technological advances. AI is a technological advance that's tremendous. It is not culture. Culture, along the same lines of it's not achievement, is not physical infrastructure. We could build a bridge from here to the moon, and that is still not culture. Culture is not scientific accomplishments. We could cure aging, and you live forever unless you're smacked by a bus. But that would not also be culture. And then thirdly, culture is not social organizations. So culture is not the governmental state. It's not other civil institutions like education or universities. Culture is not the military. It's not the police. So excluding all of those things, what culture is not, what do all those things have in common? All of those things have in common their usefulness to the human person. Those are all useful things. But Pieper's trying to get away from this notion of use because he's trying to correct the errors present in utilitarianism. So he's like, let's not talk about culture in terms of use. Culture is, now we'll go into what it is. It is beyond those things which are merely useful in life. Now, so here I wrote out an initial definition. Culture is the unified whole of those human goods and activities that transcend mere utility and arise from contemplation. So what does this mean? So Pieper contrasts these goods and activities, these particular ones, against the world of mere usefulness, against those things which have their value simply because they are ordered towards practical ends that are linked to our survival, such as the kind of things I mentioned previously. So what are some examples then of cultural goods? It's not the government, it's not educational systems, it's not physical infrastructure, it's not technological advancement, it's not scientific advancement. Rather, examples of cultural goods is philosophy, art, poetry, and in particular, worship and festivity. So he says, these things are fundamentally cultural and constitute what culture is because they're directed toward intrinsically meaningful objects. They're not merely instrumental. Okay, so that's a lot of heavy language. So I tried to say it in a different way. So let me read what I said, saying it in a different way. And if that still doesn't work, I'll say it in a third way. And if that still doesn't work, I might be done for the evening. So here's another way of explaining what culture is. So the human person, in order to survive, must fulfill basic needs: nutrition, hydration, shelter, clothing, etc. The things that help us to meet those needs we call useful. The human person, however, was not created merely to survive, but to thrive. Thriving involves achieving our higher vocation, which is union with God. God created us for this union, and he created the universe in such a way that it is struck through with vestiges of himself. So a vestige, fingerprints of himself, remnants of himself, indicators of himself, things that point to him. These vestiges order us toward God and in some sense help us to achieve union with him by achieving union with them. So what are the three vestiges that are struck through the universe that if you come out of a classical academy, you're going to be able to rattle off? Like, you guys all know them. Again, I'm just reminding you. What is it? Yep, the good, the true, and the beautiful, the transcendentals of being. So on the one hand, a person can live his life fulfilling his basic needs by means of useful goods and activities, those things I mentioned above that help us to do that, but not fulfilling his higher vocation. So think of the person who sees his work as simply a means to make money to pay the bills so that he can eat, drink, and stay warm. He punches the clock at the end of the day and goes home to play video games or drink beer. He has no other pursuits or goals. He does not even reflect upon where his life is headed. This is an objective tragedy. We recognize it as an objective tragedy because all of us have tasted the better life, the more fulfilled life, the life that's in connection with truth, beauty, and goodness. And that connection leads us to our ultimate fulfillment in God. So I already just anticipated my next paragraph. On the other hand, when our basic needs are met, the human person has the capacity to enter into a higher level of his existence than mere survival. we can transcend that which we share in common with the other creatures around us and participate in higher things. So all the other, if it's a living creature around us, those creatures are all seeking to fulfill their basic needs for survival's sake. None of the other creatures around us, in any significant or meaningful way, are living their lives over and above survival's sake. That's why it's no big deal to eat a cow. The cow really doesn't care all that much. It knows, okay, if it gets eaten, it's not going to survive. But there's no great tragedy, even in the mind of the cow, that it doesn't survive. Who cares? Now, I like cows. I like animals. I'm not saying we attack them willy-nilly. We have something different. If we live our life merely pursuing survival, that's an objective tragedy. If we live our life to pursue the higher things, things which are meaningful in themselves, then we'd say not only have we achieved the fulfillment of our purpose, what we were made, but we're also going to be tremendously happy in doing that. Happy in the deeper philosophical sense, not happy-go-lucky like the beer might provide or the bourbon, but more happiness in the sense of being fulfilled and a deep-seated joy. So this participation in the higher things and how that participation in the higher things gets incarnated within us, both as individuals and as a society, this is what culture is. So Pieper, in union with the best thinkers of the Western tradition, claim that culture flows from contemplation, not from work. So work, in Pieper's mind, is about utility. It's about meeting the basic needs for survival, more or less. When we talk about these things, it's not like that's meant in absolute terms. The work of the artist creating the beautiful artwork, well, that's not exactly the same, although he should be paid for that art so that he can eat. But generally speaking, we work so as to meet the basic needs of life for survival. But that's not the purpose of life. Life is more, and in that more of living life, giving a due response to the true, the beautiful, and the good, when we do that, we create culture. So we create it through incarnating culture through our actions, incarnating culture through what we have created in terms of works of literature, works of art, etc. Contemporary mindset looks at it in the opposite way. They see culture as a byproduct of work. We have to admit, yeah, it's necessary. Work is necessary to meet the basic needs so that we can then have the space that we need to properly respond to the true, the good, and the beautiful, and therefore culture develops. But work is a secondary cause. It's not a primary cause in all of this. So the primary cause of culture for Pieper is the fruit of leisure. Okay, so that's what culture is. Now let's talk a little bit about what is leisure. Everybody more or less following. I mean, I always say it's not rocket science. So
I knew this was culture for us getting together.
Yeah, this actually is culture. Is playing video games in one's basement culture. It's a stretch to call it culture. Maybe in some low, very mild, respect it could be, but it's a stretch. So now let's talk about leisure. The context in which Pieper lived and wrote, which is not that different from the context in which we currently find ourselves, the contemporary ideal of the human person was defining the person primarily as a worker, so that humans were and are often still valued mainly for their productivity, their utility. Education becomes a mere training for a job, for labor, not formation and truth, beauty, and goodness. And rest is merely the useful recovery for the sake of being able to do more work. It is not meaningful in itself. Everybody should use this as a gauge as we age. If we feel like we get to the end of our life and now we're worthless, then we've not learned well the lesson of authentic culture. We are not human makers, we're human beings, and that being is based in a wisdom. So we ought not to draw our self-worth from our production. We should draw our self-worth from something deeper and more intrinsic to us. So where life is dominated by total work, constant busyness, and utility, Pieper argues that true culture cannot exist. And like I say, it still persists today in the predominant philosophies out there of economy, right? Socialism on the one hand and capitalism on the other, in their extremes are both very depersonalizing. Maybe more towards the middle, we could say they're less depersonalizing, but that's only insofar as they're getting closer to the truth. But the truth is not like some dot between capitalism and socialism. The truth rides above all of that.
Practically when he was born, I'm asking to try and realize if he lived through the Third Reich. Was he a young man? Experience that, or some of this would be coming up?
He was in his 40s, in the 1940s. So, he was engaged in academia his whole life. At the time of the Third Reich, he, for all of those scholars, they all had tough choices to make. What were they going to do? Von Hildebrand chose to fight Nazism on the intellectual level until it became clear that he and his family were targets for death. So then he fled to the U.S. to continue fighting here. Someone like Josef Pieper, Bonhoeffer chose to just stay, put down his roots, and then be incarcerated for it. Someone like Pieper chose simply to go underground, to lay low until all the strife was over. I remember one of my philosophy professors talking about that and saying that is kind of the particular moral call that each person has to discern within their circumstances, that there's many right answers in the response as responses to the ugliness of evil. So he chose to sort of lay it low, work through. I don't believe he was able to do much teaching during that period. He primarily earned his living through writing. Okay, now let's define leisure. And I like to start with what it is not. So leisure is not idleness, merely doing nothing. A house cat is idle all day, but we would not say that the house cat is engaging in leisure, right? It's just idle. And leisure is not entertainment, if by entertainment we mean merely the restoration of energy so that one might return to work. Bread and circuses on the part of the Roman ruling elite wasn't really culture, although Rome had plenty of culture, but it wasn't the bread and circuses. Bread and circuses were provided just to keep a populace sated enough so that they could return to work every day. So leisure's neither of those. Now, what leisure is, this is a lot tougher. At least I found thinking it through, and here's where I start with any thinker that we try and engage with, we're always going to run into like some friction. And I'm thinking, you know what, you could have said this better. You could have said this more clear. What leisure is, so these are kind of his words, but with my thought blended in. Leisure is a receptive, contemplative stance of the soul. It is the place for wonder. It is the place for reflection. So it's a stance of the soul, and I said their place, you could say space. It's the place or the space that's carved out that permits the reflection. It permits the receptivity, the contemplation. So I'll just continue on and maybe I'll circle back to that. So leisure requires the quieting of all peripheral concerns in a person's life. What's a peripheral concern? Like, do I need an oil change? I hate it. You find out you're 10,000 miles over. It's like, oh, my car is going to have problems here. That's a peripheral concern. It's a concern of utility. I need my car to get places, but it's not a big deal in the end. Leisure requires that quieting of peripheral concerns. Leisure allows then, and this is where I think Josef Pieper, if I may be so humble as to maybe criticize a little bit, he mixes a little bit leisure with what I think is actually something distinct from leisure, which is what leisure permits, which is contemplation of and the appropriate response to the higher things of truth, beauty, and goodness. So leisure gives the space for the contemplation of and the proper response to those higher things of truth, beauty, and goodness. Once you have that space, then you have the question, am I going to use it, right? So the person who's working day in, day out with bloody knuckles because that's all they can do to make ends meet, they don't have the space that is leisure, that permits the contemplation, that then permits the incarnation of the response to these good things that we're contemplating. So we look at our own lives and say, well, do I have that space? I'd say more or less in the United States, here and now, Northwest Ohio, most of us probably have that space, at least to some small degree. So then what do we do with that space? And then it's a choice. It's up to us. Do we want to use that space to contemplate, which means to present before our consciousness some great good, some great reality, that's true or good or beautiful, and then attempt to know it ever more deeply for what it is and let it speak to us. And then as it speaks to us, then it's also going to speak to us how it ought to be treated or respected. Are we going to let that happen or not? If we choose not to let it happen, then we've wasted our leisure. But if we choose to let it happen, then culture is going to become incarnated within us. Now, could I use some examples for that? The contemplation born from leisure results in activity. For example, celebration. He talks about the idea of a true feast or festival or holiday always has to be oriented towards some great good, some objective good in itself, not some utilitarian good, but some objective good in itself. And so he says all of the greatest of holidays are oriented towards the religious. So celebration, music, the arts in general, worship, composition, critical thinking. So a person who chooses to use his leisure to compose some great work of literature, we'd say, well, what's the process there? Well, so in their leisure, the person contemplates the state of the human person. Take a good classic novel, I like the novel Anna Karenina. The author knows something about the state of the human person, which is that human existence is often messy as we engage in it, and can cause a person to have ambiguous attitudes towards their existence. So that's Anna Karenina. I'll give it away. She commits suicide. She throws herself in front of a train. And then there's about 500 more pages after that you're thinking, why did you just wrap it up a little earlier? That's an example of using the space which leisure provides to contemplate some great truth, the state of personhood, the state of existence. Now, that's kind of a darker contemplation, and the novel does offer some not dark results. But then to move into incarnating it. And so to take what one has contemplated and to incarnate it in a composition is a beautiful thing that all the rest of us can benefit from. So you can see that even culture has an aspect of utility to it, just like everything that is useful ultimately has some aspect of being a good in and of itself. But that's a different question. We won't go into it. Here I'm just going through some basic points that kind of we can conclude now that we know what culture is and what leisure is. So culture flows from leisure. Another thing is there is an underlying metaphysical and anthropological dimension or dimensions to leisure. So metaphysical truth that underlies all this is that reality is a gift. Reality is not merely raw material for use. And it's something that is a gift contains within it a unique preciousness. Who gives, so I speak a little bluely here, who gives dog crap to someone as a gift? No one. There's no intrinsic preciousness to that. One gives something that's intrinsically precious, that holds value in and of itself, importance in and of itself as a gift. All of reality is a gift, at least to some degree. Some aspects of reality are greater gifts than others, and those are the things that we classify as the transcendentals of being. Reality is not merely raw material for use. Another underlying dimension to all of this is leisure is the human way of receiving that gift or those gifts rightly, appropriately. And when I say human way, what I mean by that, what Pieper would mean by that is that an engaged way, a way that is a way of understanding, that we know what we're doing by giving the right response to the gift. And then another dimension that we can draw out, it's anthropological because it's moral. Leisure is not optional, but necessary if the human person is to achieve his full dignity as being created for transcendence. This goes back to what Greg was saying and the Sabbath. God didn't make man for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. And the Sabbath is precisely leisure. It's meant to be that time. And to attempt to impose a way of life that is Sabbath-less or leisure-less is a grave immoral immorality. Okay, another conclusion we can draw from this. There's also underlying theological dimensions of leisure that, as I mentioned before, the highest form of leisure is worship. And that's because God as the supreme being is the source of this truth, goodness, and beauty. And even the word itself, culture, reveals that. Culture comes from cultus, which means worship. The most important festivals are always sacred observances. They ground and renew culture. That's why other holidays that don't have a deep connection with the religious, they kind of fall flat. I mean, what is Labor Day? And then all these other governmental holidays, they're good. I'm not saying that they're bad. But you look and you say, it's really hard to get behind Labor Day. It's, I don't know. At least I find it hard to get behind Labor Day. Immaculate Conception, now I can rally behind that, less so about Labor Day. And yet Immaculate Conception is not a holiday here, but in many Catholic countries it is. Okay. And then lastly here, before my conclusion, the consequences of no leisure. So culture never develops. So think of indigenous cultures where they never technologically developed enough to get beyond merely meeting basic necessities day in and day out. We speak on grand terms about their culture, but I mean, it's embarrassing if there's no leisure. Or if there's no leisure and culture had already developed, it becomes then shallow, it degrades, and it can even collapse altogether. Education becomes purely instrumental. We are then just cogs in a machine who need to be properly cut and trimmed so that we can be that appropriate cog. And then we lose contact with that which we were created for, truth, beauty, and goodness, and ultimately God himself. And then our misery index rises. Okay, so I'll wrap it up just with this little bit of a conclusion. So the human person is not made for mere survival. We are made for transcendence. We transcend to things greater than ourselves. We are true, good, and beautiful to some degree, each of us. But the wholeness of truth, beauty, and goodness is far greater than we ourselves are as individuals. If all our time is spent merely pursuing basic survival, we'll never achieve transcendence, that transcendence for which we were made. Leisure is the space and the attitude, the openness necessary for such transcendence. From leisure flows culture, which is that ensemble of goods and activities which arise from our deeper understanding of reality and what is truly important. God himself is the real grounding of all true culture. So more or less, I think that's what Pieper says or would say, with a little bit of me kind of put in there too. So I'm open to any questions.
Since I'm hosting, I get to go first. As a pastor of many, what advice how do you speak directly to those to invite them to even set aside other things and make that path?
So a plan of life for prayer is absolutely necessary. If you don't have a plan of life for prayer, you're probably not going to be praying all that productively. You might throw a prayer up here and there, but it's not probably going to be a super productive prayer. Now that sounds like, well, prayer is an utility. Should it be? But by productive, I mean prayer that actually allows the person to enter into the space which is necessary for contemplation of the great good who is God. So if you don't have the plan of prayer, this is just not going to happen. So that's one necessary tool that helps a person develop, you could say, the authentic response to the true, the good, and the beautiful. I'm less worried about how it produces culture. I'm more worried that it produces a response to the true, the beautiful, and the good, and then that necessarily produces culture. A second thing is suffering. Drew's word for the night. There is no growth without suffering, and the more painful it is, often the more the growth is there. Most of the time, well, I wouldn't say most of the time, that's extreme on my part. A lot of the times, the pursuit of whether it be technologically based or something else, it's an abhorrence of the void. It's a running away from the silence because I'm very much afraid what I'm going to encounter in that silence. And what probably we will encounter in the silence is suffering. And the ultimate only answer to suffering is eternal life. It's not satisfactory in this life, but it does give us hope for something more to come. So yeah, insisting on time for prayer, that we all have a plan for daily prayer, and that prayer has a space for giving appropriate reaction to God, which can and should be both formal and informal, and then a willingness to accept suffering. We don't have to seek it all that much. It's like in our face most of the time, most days. So just a willingness to accept that, and not to say that suffering is a gift from God or it's a blessing from God. You have to be careful when you say that. But rather to say suffering is a reality, and one that if we engage it properly will bring us to God. If we engage it improperly, it's going to bring us to bitterness.
I read the book also, but it's also been 25 years.
Yeah.
But I just want to make a few comments and see what you think. What kind of struck me tonight as you were talking was it would seem that leisure is perfected with the incarnation of Christ. That he's the Logos, that he said, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. And that St. Paul even makes allusions to the spiritual growth, to the athletic, to the physical, and that those that lived before the incarnation could not have possibly perfected culture. The Greeks were striving. They were trying to get there, but they couldn't.
That'd be the one difference that you actually just corrected yourself. I don't know as I would go so far as to say the incarnation is the perfection of leisure. The incarnation is the perfection of culture.
Yeah, that's what
Yep.
try to say.
Yeah.
And then what seems to be lacking, like tonight, or in what maybe Pieper was saying when I read it back then, what seemed to be a little bit absent was the role that physical activity, sports, plays in forming and shaping the will. Because it seems that the problem we have in our modern culture in the United States today is we have a lot of mental contemplation and ideas and thinking, politics and opinions, or knowing what we should do but not doing it as the byproduct, when the real problem is we need more exercise of the will as God would have us exercise the will. And so therefore, barbell training, bicycling, swimming, athletics for the very good, because I would guess athletics is a subsection of the good, but it would play into the exercise of the will. And I'm not real sure that Pieper takes us down that road of the will, just leaves us with the mind and contemplation.
Yeah, the formation of the will is necessary in order to carve out that space, which is leisure, so that then one can, again, with a well-formed will, apply the space to the right response to the great goods. So yeah, I would agree with that.
I feel like in the world of maybe this group or quite a few of the individuals or couples in this group practice a faith-filled life, very purpose-filled life, where transcendence is, I believe, a part of it. And I feel like it almost seems to me that if our worth is measured by our output, then who actually are we when the world stops clapping and starts giving us praise? We need to find something after that point of just, trying to find transcendence, trying to find a closer connection where we're here for doing good, and we're all doing good, and there's a lot of really good people in this group, and I love being a part of it. And I just feel like that Josef Pieper definitely speaks to me in that manner, that of transcendence.
There's a lot of truth in that, and that there's a necessity to teach this to the youngest of people so that they don't get erroneous mindset built up that they then carry with them for the rest of their life. I mean, probably all know examples of the successful businessman who, upon his retirement, goes and takes a folding chair in his backyard and blows his brains out. And why does he do that? Because he has no sense of transcendence, and everything has to do with utility. And I'm worthless now. I can't go into the office anymore. Might as well end it.
In a culture swimming with utilitarianism, I mean, in everything that you can think of, it's there. The healthcare system, the education system. I mean, go through it. Our technology, everything we have. It's all of it is so incredibly dehumanizing. We don't even realize it. But just education, though, is something that always bothers me. Talking about what a college education should be. The Catholic Church came up with the universities and the value of what a true liberal arts education should be, and not just for a job. Like, why to get that degree? Because that's really, a daughter who was an English major, and, what would you do with that? She did a lot with it. It was wonderful. But anyways, if you would, maybe you could expand in this, how to look at education as more than just that.
Yeah. Honestly, I think well done education could end at 8th grade for most people. Well done. Unfortunately, it's not well done, and so it takes a lot longer than that. But what do I mean by well done? I mean introducing, functional things that are required for life, which aren't that much. There's not that much. Unless you're going to a very specialized job, there's not that much that's required functionally. And more importantly, the response to value, things which are important in themselves. That can be learned and can be learned early and can set the person on a good trajectory for the rest of their life. Now, should it all end at 8th grade? No. We can develop beyond that. And it does look like, and this is not to be harshly critical, but it does look like our general education system is ordered towards the producing of cogs to make a machine run. Now, I'm grateful for those cogs. When I need a surgery, I want the right cogs in the right place to help me to have a good surgery and a good recovery. But that can't be the high point of everyone's life. Oh, I was a good anesthetist. No, that's not the high point of your life. You might have been a good anesthetist, and great, that's awesome. You helped a lot of people. But there's even more important things in life than having done that. And a good education helps the person to discover that. Our economist.
I was going to say, if you asked a father in the 1950s, what's the primary purpose of work? It was to take care of the family, to take care of things, shelter, clothing, food. And in today's world, it's the opposite. People find purpose in their work. The primary purpose of work is to find who they are. And then, look, I just want to make a comment. A lot of the sins kind of flow from that. Why do people have abortions? Because it's before their career. It's before things. So, I mean, everything you're saying resonates like economically of what we see in today's world. We don't see family in those values, right? It's not the primary purpose is to have children anymore. It's to have that career. So you want to comment on that?
Along those lines, and along with what Bob was just talking about, the great educators are mom and dad.
Yes.
And when we fail to value that, then easily we fall along the lines of a utilitarian notion of existence, that we're all just here to perform a little function, and when that function's over, then our importance dies.
Thank you, Father, for doing a great job tonight. And, even Charles Chaplin back in the 20s had a way of teaching that very same thing. You remember the film Modern Times, the cog in the wheel, and how the individual prevailed at the end with the poor girl that he took care of and all. So I think that's a great instructional piece in it with a comedy involved. And just one other thought. Years ago, I remember downtown at the Toledo Club in that magnificent Centennial Room above the fireplace, they're carved in stone. Ovid, the philosopher, said something to the effect, rest and relaxation refreshes both body and mind. And on the other side, unrelenting toil destroys both. And I think that's pretty much what you were saying, isn't it?
How much will you contest that his going against, general society and culture was really him being touched by the Holy Spirit, by the Holy Spirit to have a higher calling, just like potentially all of us, even stepping foot in this house, in this room, and being, open.
It's part of the nature and the mission of the church, of which we're all members, to do that. And that's why, I look at Josef Pieper, who drew deeply from St. Thomas Aquinas, and then I look at my philosophy professor, the professor of law, or that taught the philosophy of law, who was kind of my mentor in philosophy. Very different approach to philosophy. He was kind of the phenomenological realist school, you could say. What did they both have in common? A tremendous deep faith in our Lord and in his church. And that's what drew them together in such a close friendship, because they both sought to live out that love for our Lord and the church. So even though they probably did have even significant differences on some levels in philosophy, that their faith is what united them in the end. and what drove them to do what they did with their lives.
Okay, so how do you think then is the best way to like teach leisure to our children or to ourselves? Like, how do you grow in having true leisure in your life?
Right. So with anything, understanding is the first step. So we understand what it is, and then we move from understanding to action. So for each of us, what that action is going to look like is going to be different. As husband and wife, for example, you're going to have to take your understanding of leisure and then, in working together, apply it particularly to your situation. The best way to teach it is to live it, and to live it in a conscious way with your children. So, like, it's never good to say to a kid who has questions, well, that's what we believe, period. No, well, why do we believe it? So the same would be true with leisure and culture being the response to these great goods, to explain why we're doing what we're doing. It won't always catch. Parents have to realize that, that there'll be lost battles, so to speak, and parents have to become comfortable with that over the course of their lives. But often enough it will catch. And so we rejoice in the times that it does catch within children.
It occurred to me as you were talking, Father, that about 12 years ago, I was introduced to a virtue called eutropelia. And I don't know if anyone has heard of the Christian virtue of eutropelia.
I took an antibiotic, it cleared it right up.
But Maureen knows what I'm talking about. It's actually the Christian virtue of leisure. And we learned about it in our Little Flowers Catholic Girls Club. And I'm not sure what saint was attached to that virtue, but maybe it was Mary. But I had the same thought that entered my mind, teaching it to our children. And every family is so unique. And what you said about understanding, and that moves to action, and the rules of discernment that we have to utilize in every situation, because lots of things could become true leisure in the sense of the virtue of that. And so I'm still trying to figure that out after 27 years, but this has been very helpful.
Can I comment on that? Just something that I've gone through personally, because I struggled with these issues about what's appropriate use of time, free time, because we're given our free time through God. Mm-hmm. We will be accountable for all of our time. And I'm single. I live alone. So in 2015, I removed my television just because what was coming into my leisure time was worldly and not good. And I eliminated most of the cultural sports that were the same problem for me. And the growth that I had in my leisure as a result of removing the worldly things, the doors that opened up and the time that opened up for really beautiful things that God wanted to give me were, blossomed. Because, I'm sure all of you are protecting your children, but if you think about it, to the degree that you remove the world and replace it with beautiful and good leisure of Christ, you're going to really grow. It's really remarkable when you back off from the world.
It's hard sometimes to turn the TV off. But I get it. Because how could I watch Ben-Hur? I'm just saying, Ben-Hur, 10 Commandments, Jesus of Nazareth. I'm more alarmed by what's put forth if you go to the Museum of Art or other places. I'm not going to give it a bad name because I've enjoyed so much time there, as what is modern art. And it more alarming to us should be the bankruptcy that's spawning that which is supposed to be elemental to our culture and supposed to speak to us, and they're, great hunks of darkness or globs of paint. And it's trying to create an artificial type of contemplation because we have none. The second part of this is, and it's something, it really is heartening in this room to see all of you, and especially talk about the kids and all that, because we all had to face that and how to bring that to them, is that it shows, I can say it, it shows the failure and the corpse of the robust Catholic culture from before, because it was a mile wide and a few inches deep at best, because the eighth grade was where most people went. Maybe high school, they supposedly learned their faith, and a whole chunk of them have abandoned it, or they believe a perversion of it that doesn't affect their lives, that doesn't create leisure, it doesn't create contemplation, and they were taught more or less that 1950s style of utilitarian Catholicism, that this is the purpose in doing so, I do God's will, and therefore I provide for my family, I do God's will, and therefore when I retire with these things, I can also do good things and do God's will. And so that way, a sort of capitalist dialectic was incorporated into what it meant to be a American Catholic. And then after the changes, both cultural, liturgical, and whatnot, and especially insidiously done through Catholic schools and universities and colleges, they unlearned the culture. So the remnant that John Paul II talked about that was needed to be there, that smaller, stronger, very loving place that is our Catholic culture that's in this room, is striving very hard by restudying all these things to learn that again, to come out of the catacombs, and we're not going anywhere, to create that space with our children, between the spouses, with our families, and to touch everybody that we see. That's the missionary spirit that's in this room. But I just wanted to see your take on that. You know that there's a lot behind everything I say, which is why you're smiling, because there's a lot I leave unsaid. But I think it's something that we really do have to face, that a lot of the people who wear masks as Catholics aren't, and they are actually contributing to the demise of leisure and culture in the name of the faith. And so we have sort of like we're living beneath the radar in our own subculture.
Right, yeah. I would just say I take that as a given.
It's time, and you're seeing the young folks, and you're seeing the converts. And I will say that whether it's to Catholicism, which is, the true faith, or its cousin, Eastern Orthodoxy, they're all looking for back to basics. They're looking for something that's real. They are looking for a real place where they can grow their families. They're looking for a real sacred space where they know that a church is a church, not a multi-purpose building, where the Blessed Sacrament is right there in front of you all the time, whether it's a statue or an icon. I can light candles, I can say prayers in this safe space, which is God's house, and take that safe space and enlarge the society in which I live. And they're looking for what is real, and they're not finding it. They're not finding it in the secularism of the world. They're not finding it in the art, the secular religions of the world, and they're not finding it in the counterfeit religion of the world, which is Islam. They're simply not finding it. They try to, like that's what's overtaken Europe, and it's rebounding on itself now, and thus they're seeking us out, and we need to be more prepared to encompass them into that space.
Father, I think we in this room are among very few who believe there's an objective universal truth. That truth is not something we can presume to determine, but someone in whom we are determined. So speak to, if you could, the modern world that is radicalized in that realm versus when Pieper was writing, and the importance of recovering the foundation of objective universal.
Well, I say this first. Thank God for the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit conspires for the good and can take all things, even evil, and bring good out of it. What can we do to give another person faith? We can do some things, but ultimately it is God's acting that gives that other person faith and that other person's cooperation with that acting. It's helpful to have a big picture understanding of the setting in which we live. Like when I talk to married couples, or not married couples, but couples preparing for marriage, I'll say we live within two worldviews. There's more than two worldviews, but in Northwest Ohio, there's predominantly two worldviews. There's the Judeo-Christian worldview, and there's the secular atheistic human worldview. Secular means just of the times. Atheistic means without God. Humanistic means that when you remove God from his place, then humanity is the next obvious top of the pyramid. What happens in that worldview is that we see the human person as a meaning maker, fundamentally. Are we meaning makers? Yes. Are we fundamentally or primarily meaning makers? No. But in the secular, atheistic, humanistic worldview, that is what we are primarily. So what it means is because there is no God, there is no inherent meaning in the universe. If there's no inherent meaning in the universe, well, you can't survive without purpose or meaning. You do, then blow your brains out pretty quickly. So where then is meaning come from? It comes from you, the person. You create it. You create what your meaning is. And then they ignore the question of where your instincts or desires come from so as to create the meaning that you want, right? But we have to recognize that that's a major worldview amongst the people that we deal with day in and day out and amongst ourselves. Sure. We are more atheists than we realize. But then the other worldview, the Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview, is a worldview that says there is a creator, and his creation is struck through with his vestiges, and that our purpose in life is to discover the meaning that he has placed within ourselves and within that creation. And in doing so, we fulfill our purpose. And a corollary to that, or a result of that, more than corollary, is happiness. That's what we believe, but we have to be very careful about how much we're affected by that other worldview as it comes in. So in the Judeo-Christian worldview, we recognize, we're meaning makers to some small degree, but more importantly, we're meaning discoverers. And that's how we should spend our life, is discovering the meaning that God struck through our existence.
This has been, I've rethought the parable of the sower because of this talk, and then the importance of Philippians 4:8, which I would just suggest everyone read. My question is motivation. Is it possible that two people with different motivations doing the same thing, one is seeking something transcendent and one is seeking something utilitarian? The example, let's talk about science. One scientist searches the universe to see the footprints, the hand of God. Another scientist searches the universe because he wants to make he wants money. Let's be honest. Let's be blunt. Is there room for that thought?
Absolutely, it exists. Can the same duality of motive exist within a single person and it be morally acceptable?
In my example, though, it's two different people. Person A does it to see the God's hands. The other person is doing it for money, but they're doing the same thing. They're both in the telescope, or they're in the petri dish.
Yep. Yeah. Motive is a significant factor in the moral act. And so, yes, it's definitely possible for two different people. Can it be possible that both motives exist within the same person? Yes. Is that morally acceptable? It depends upon the degree of the less important motive. The motive of money-making is not inherently evil, but it can become so if it usurps the more altruistic or response to God motive.
May I read Philippians 4:8?
Absolutely.
Because now I understand even in a greater way why the Apostle Paul wrote this. Philippians 4:8, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. I have a certain philosophy, and basically every single sermon I preach is pointing to the first commandment. I mean, I try to be creative with it, but basically I'm repeating myself for the last almost 20 plus years. My question, though, is this: when we don't pursue the transcendent, the virtues, are we not subjecting ourselves to idolatry?
Exactly. And that is where those two worldviews are the fundamental divergence is whether or not there is a God or whether we think we are the God. When we read the sacred scriptures, all idolatry is a turning back upon oneself, upon the person. The medievals picked that up with their definition of sin is to be turned in upon oneself. We can speak of idolatry in terms of like worshiping alien gods, but ultimately we're worshiping ourselves. And each of those idols represents simply one aspect of our self-worship.
As we close this first live from the living room, don't let this just be another conversation you heard. Let it become a conversation you live, because what Father Adam had laid before us isn't theoretical. It's deeply practical and quietly demanding. If culture flows from leisure, and leisure is the space where we become receptive to what is true, good, and beautiful, then the final simple question is this: what are we making space for? So here's the invitation. This week, create that space. Turn something off, put the phone down. Gather your spouse, your family, a couple of friends, and begin. Not perfectly, just honestly.
And as you do this, remember, you're not just passing time. You're building culture. You're forming souls. You're participating in something far bigger than you realize.
If this conversation moved you, share it. Invite someone into it and journey with us. Find the daily Live It Today reflection and podcast again at liveittoday.us. That middle it is to image the Trinity. It's the ultimate aspiration of our souls, without which we'll be languishing. So again, liveittoday.us. And if you believe in this mission, we do invite you to please consider partnering with us. Because meaningful relationships, they're the currency of the kingdom. They're the currency of this existence. They're why we're alive. And we're building it, one living room at a time.
We'll see you next time.